Another good year has come and gone, and here is a list about the games that I first played in 2015. This time, I played 25 games. Some games I loved, some games I didn't, and some that I just found relatively decent. So, just like in the past 3 lists on this topic, I'm going to talk about every game I started playing in 2015, from least favorite to most favorite. I really wanted to get this out by the end of April, but life got in the way and I had to delay it. Enjoy the list. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn was a huge letdown to me. Though the item system is even better than in Path of Radiance because they have more item space, and you play in different groups of characters, other than that, Radiant Dawn has like no innovation after Path of Radiance. Plus, I found it weird that the camera angle is no longer changeable, and has one of the most unmemorable stories in the entire franchise. I can't remember a single thing about it without looking anything up. The majority of the game's music is just the sounds of fog. What kind of game has a soundtrack consisting mostly of that? For a Fire Emblem game, it's bland. I was expecting that it would be almost as good as Path of Radiance. Not the case. It's one of those games where a good game can sometimes have a terrible sequel. For a sequel to one of the best Fire Emblem games in the franchise, Radiant Dawn was just disappointing. However, on the bright side, it made me like Awakening and Path of Radiance even more in comparison. When I did my collab with the Guildmaster back in 2014, which was a terrible collab on both of our parts by the way, we put Nobunaga on our list of underrated bosses. In making the video, I realized that maybe I should get Conquest. I got the game, and my gosh, it is one of the most disappointing games I've ever played. While not as disappointing as Pokemon Colosseum, it is in my mind worse. Because while that game at least has a somewhat interesting atmosphere, Conquest, not to say the atmosphere is bad, it's just hard to remember for me. And Pokemon Conquest barely has any content to it. It gets very repetitive, and there isn't that much strategy needed for it, and the movement animations take way too long, even when you set them to the fastest option. But at least the music's pretty good. The way you attack opponents in different spots is cool. The game overall, no. I've stated this in my top 10 games that I love and hate, and I'll say it again. I'm not much of an Animal Crossing fan. I tried playing the game that began the franchise, and I can't really say it was a game that I would play again. It's a game where the player customizes everything and brings stuff to the museum, so that's pretty much all you do. It's just you saving up on money to get more and more to decorate your house, which is fun the first few days, but it gets dull after a while. Yeah, you know how in some games there are points where you have to keep grinding up on money until you're able to afford something? Imagine that being the concept of the entire game. And the 3D map can be annoying at times because in the middle row there's only one area where you can pass through it. That's going to be a real hassle because it's hard to remember where you can or can't climb. Though it is a very fun task helping people in need because you feel like you did something truly thoughtful to someone, and the graphics are very nice. But that doesn't stop me from disliking the Animal Crossing games. For all they're worth, they're not bad, but they're just not for me. "27 years ago, Japan got a little game called Mother, which was the predecessor to Earthbound. But unfortunately, they couldn't release it outside of Japan, until 26 years later, when they finally brought it to America in the form of Earthbound Beginnings, which I think is a much better name. So I downloaded it on the Wii U Virtual Console, and I was not impressed. Not that it's a bad game, it's just hugely outdated. The graphics, despite being 8-bit, look more 4-bit than anything, and as for the battle system, when multiple enemies appear on screen at once, they take a while to come up thanks to the graphical limitations. If you direct all your attacks at one target, if the opponent falls, your attacks will not carry on to the next target, instead they'll miss. I know this was made back in the early NES days, but that doesn't mean the problem isn't there, and the difficulty spikes are just brutal. You'll be all over the enemies in one area, only to get your butt kicked by the ones in the next, especially in that final level, Mount Itoy. It is undoubtedly one of the most painful final dungeons I've ever come to, because the enemies can take you down from max HP to like 20 within seconds. I know I shouldn't expect it to be as good as Earthbound because, well, Beginnings existed first and was a whole generation before, but it isn't the game for me. Mega Man 6 in my mind wasn't as strong as the other games in the Mega Man series, because the music wasn't as catchy and the levels weren't as memorable. But is Mega Man 6 bad? Honestly, I can't tell if it is or not. As stated in my least favorite villains list, this was the point where I lost all faith in Dr. Wily, because of how even before this, it was always the villain which came off as a slap to the face, since they made it look like someone else was. And this was especially insulting because his disguise was super obvious. It does, however, have its strong points. The music is still good, and the fact that it bears resemblance to other countries around the globe, that was a very good theme because of the different variety and creative liberties that the levels are given. And the Rush Jetpack is something I am very grateful for, because it makes platforming so much easier. I don't have anything else to say about Mega Man 6. I can't really tell if I like it or hate it. I skipped over Wild World on City Folk because I heard that every Animal Crossing game is basically the last one except better. But I still wanted to shout out the first one, and I wanted to skip to this one because Chugga Conroy's Let's Play made it look promising. I got it, and, well, let's just say it looked more fun than it actually was. But it's improved from the first installment. Players can now save in the town without having to go to their house, there's more customization, and after a bit of time, Captain will stop by and give you a lift to Tortimer's Island, which is a very nice change of scenery. Another feature here that was pretty addicting was trying to get as many fish as you can. I know that wasn't the others, but for some reason I just enjoyed it more here. I don't know why, it's just quite fun. For the first week. That being said, the formula is still the same repetitive formula as the rest of the series. Well, the music's decent, and the fact that different songs play at different times is a great idea. However, there's nothing else I can say about it. It's decent. Mega Man 7 is among one of the most underrated Mega Man games I've ever played in my opinion. Oh no, it has Super Nintendo graphics as opposed to 8-bit graphics! The game's horrible! Okay, seriously, this is a pathetic excuse. I was more bothered by some of the most frustrating bosses of the Mega Man series, especially Burst Man. Trapping you in a bubble which takes you to the spiked ceiling and killing you in one shot is one of the cheapest things I've ever seen. But I still love all the different Robot Masters. And with enhanced graphics, that means nicer looking levels too. It's a traditional Mega Man game, just with different graphics. And the fact that you have more limited ways to face the Robot Masters in the order you want, since instead of the normal 8 to choose from, there's one set of 4, followed by another level and then another set of 4. And how it's a little slower paced than most games in the series. Though that is kind of annoying, overall I love Mega Man 7. Mario Party 5 is another great game that I don't have much to say about it to differentiate it from the other Mario Party games. Other than how the story plays out, it's pretty neat to see the star spirits from Paper Mario returning, and in 3D nonetheless. In addition to that, in the story mode, instead of the usual having to get the most stars, you have to get your opponents to run out of coins. That's a pretty nice change from the usual Mario Party objectives. Now let me tell you about the minigames. The minigames are as fun as ever, but I hate how there are more button mashers and luck-based events than the previous Mario Party games. And it feels kind of slow at times, but for everything it did wrong, it did something right. And even though it isn't one of the better Mario Parties, I appreciate it for what it's worth. One of the most boring parts for the Nintendo Directs for me is when they advertise a bunch of eShop games that I just don't think they look all that interesting. And I'm like, oh come on Nintendo, just get onto the games that we want. But there was this one game that caught my eye in the November 2015 Direct. A little game called Fast Racing Neo. This is a fun racing game in the style of F-Zero, and it even has its own mechanic to it. The way you switch the color of your motor. If it's blue, you boost on blue boost pads, but you slow down on orange ones. If it's orange, you boost on orange boost pads and slow down on blue ones. A pretty clever mechanic if you ask me. The levels are also spectacular to look at. Just not as good looking as they are in F-Zero. Like in F-Zero, it feels awesome going at great speeds. Surprisingly, a lot of people were considering getting Fast Racing Neo because of its similarities to F-Zero, yet didn't bother to pick it up. I bet they have their reasons, but I'm still surprised by this. Honestly, I think Fast Racing Neo deserves better treatment. It's a great game that you should pick up if you're a big fan of F-Zero. Mario Party 4 is just like other Mario Party games, being tons of fun. Like the other installments in the series, it has some really great minigames. The game's storyline revolves around the birthday of whoever you're playing as. Your goal is to win the games, because if you win the games, then you get your birthday presents. Guys, that's not how birthdays work. The levels are still pretty awesome to play, and there's a better selection of minigames than in 5, because there aren't as many luck-based ones. Plus, it has the Mega and Mini Mushrooms, which increase or decrease the amount of spaces characters can move in one turn. Oh, the amount of opportunities you'll have to take advantage of that. I would make this entry longer, but there's really nothing else to say about Mario Party 4, except for how, since it's on the GameCube, it'll obviously have better graphics than its predecessor, so I'll wrap this entry up saying it's a fun game. As epic as some ROM hacks I've seen look, I wish I could create my own someday, but sadly I am unable to because it supports piracy. So I guess the closest I have to that is Super Mario Maker. I'm pretty sure everything's already been said about it, but if I were to make the entry less than a minute long, you'd all throw tomatoes at me, so I'll just explain it anyways. Mario Maker allows players to create their own Mario stages in the form of Super Mario Bros., Super Mario Bros. 3, Super Mario World, and New Super Mario Bros. U. It has its sample levels, but you will be the one creating most of them. It doesn't include every type of enemy in those respective games, so no Banzai Bills or Sumo Brothers, but the ones they do have are good to use. I've created some reduxes of stages from other Mario games, like the first levels from Super Mario Land, Super Paper Mario, and Yoshi's Island, but honestly, I prefer playing on other people's levels rather than my own, because I feel they have better ideas than I do. I've seen some of those automatic stages that are insane, a few creepy stages that are surprisingly very creepy, and those Kaizo stages that are so lucky that they are fan-made and don't qualify for a worst Mario levels list. It gets dull pretty quickly, and some enemies look weird since they get photoshopped into certain bits, especially the Wii U enemies in the original Super Mario Bros. Format, but that doesn't stop Mario Maker from being good. Xenoblade Chronicles X may not have as many lovable environments as the original game, let alone not as many areas. They don't look as beautiful, and it isn't as long, but does that make Xenoblade X bad? No. I initially hated it, but after playing it for a few hours, it really grew on me. The environments are still massive. Now you have 2 different weapons instead of 1, your sword which is good for power, and your gun which can shoot enemies from a distance. It throws a new mechanic into the mix, the Skells. When in control of these giant robots, you are far stronger, you can travel around land more safely, and after a while, you can even fly in them. That'll make traveling so much easier. Only problem is when you have to get them refueled or repaired when they break down. You have to teleport back to the Blade Barracks to refuel them. I would be okay with this if it weren't pretty much required to beat some of the bosses, but that aside, still a great experience. After playing Star Fox Adventures and not exactly being the biggest fan of it, I heard people talk about Star Fox Assault, how it was also a very disappointing game, so I was unsure about getting it. Over the years, I got more tempted to play it after hearing some people say it's not that bad. It is indeed as great as those people say it is. The controls are honestly not that bad, though the voice acting could be a bit better. I mean, put some emotion into it. The reason a lot of people hate Star Fox Assault is because they have no tolerance of the land missions. Just because it's not the same, doesn't make it bad. It still has the R-Wing segments, and they play a big part, so I don't know what you guys are complaining about. I've heard some complaints of the Landmaster controls saying they're too stiff, but let's face it, they've always been a problem, even in Star Fox 64. The parts where you fire at enemies while riding the wing of someone's R-Wing, that's how to fight in style. Hunting down the targets is actually pretty fun when you're trying to seek them out. Like I said, I wasn't very big on Star Fox Adventures, but I do like Soria and how it's a nice throwback to Adventures. Once again, good game. It feels kind of weird. Pac-Man was the first game I've ever played, and yet I haven't played the Pac-Man World games. But when I did get my hands on the first one, I have no regrets. Pac-Man World is a platformer while still feeling like Pac-Man, with sound effects, dots, and some remixes of Pac-Man songs. Though to be frankly honest with you, I think they spend a little too much on doing this. Though it's still nice. In addition, instead of constantly interrupting your game with tutorials, they have everything you need to know on signs. As for the bosses, they're quite creative. The Galaxian ship with its throwback to Galaga, Anubis Rex with its floor panels which can actually be pretty annoying for he'll keep spamming attacks on you while you're supposed to be running in place, and a kart racing game in the Clown Prix, which by the way is my favorite boss in the game. I wish I could go on about Pac-Man World, but I don't have anything else to say. So if you're a fan of platformers and Pac-Man, I would definitely recommend this game for you. I would not say that I would call Triforce Heroes a true Zelda game, because the story was really weak for reasons that I explained in my worst villains list. I understand this was intended to be a more lighthearted and comedic Zelda story than most games in the series, and I'll admit it was stupid of me to think it was meant to be taken seriously, but this isn't what I signed up for when I bought a game called Triforce Heroes. But is it still good? Yes. A team of 3 Links instead of 1. Before you ask, no, I haven't played the Four Swords games. Triforce Heroes allows you to even have some links stacked on another to form a totem in order to reach switches. The weapons are still good like you'd expect from a Zelda game, but I still prefer the way of finding the weapons in the dungeons instead of getting them right away. But the puzzle elements are still a joy to play through, and it's a good test of strategy. Again, I wouldn't call it a true Zelda game, but it's still fun.